I'm a voyeur who spies on my neighbors. The man I was watching committing murder looked right back at me. I know exactly what I am. I'm a voyeur. It's a bad habit, a deep character flaw, and I've never tried to justify it to anyone, not even to myself. Living on the 5th floor of a massive, densely packed apartment complex offers a strange kind of anonymity. You become a ghost in a concrete hive. The building across the courtyard is an exact architectural mirror of my own. At night, it turns into a massive grid of glowing yellow squares, each one framing a different, completely oblivious life. My living room remains entirely dark. I sit in a worn armchair pulled close to the glass, resting my elbows on the windowsill to steady my hands. The binoculars I use are heavy, featuring large objective lenses that pull in the ambient city light and strip away the distance. I spend hours turning the focus ring, watching people eat dinner in front of their televisions, watching couples argue in muted silence, watching the mundane, private routines of strangers. It was a compulsion born from profound boredom and isolation. A few nights ago, the weather was exceptionally poor. A heavy, restless rain washed out the city, keeping everyone indoors. The courtyard below was empty, the pavement slick and black. I raised the binoculars, wiping a smudge of condensation from the eyepiece, and directed my attention to the 3rd floor of the opposite building. The window belonged to a woman who lived alone. I had observed her routine before. She usually read on her sofa until late, drank a glass of water, and turned off the main overhead light, leaving only a small, dim bedside lamp glowing in the corner of her room. She pulled the covers back and settled into the mattress, reaching over to click off the lamp. The room plunged into a deep shadow, illuminated by gray ambient light filtering from the street lamps below. I kept the lenses focused on her window, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the lowered light. A vertical slice of darkness in the far corner of her room began to move. He detached from the angle of the wall. At first, my brain struggled to process the shape. He was tall and moved across the bedroom floor toward the sleeping woman. I held my breath, pressing the binoculars hard against my brow. The man leaned over the bed. His arms reached down toward the pillows. The woman thrashed violently. Her back arched off the mattress. Her hands flew up, clawing desperately at the space above her throat. The struggle was brutal and completely silent behind the heavy pane of glass separating our buildings. The towering, emaciated man remained perfectly rigid, pressing his weight down, absorbing her desperate strikes without shifting his stance. I sat frozen in my armchair, entirely paralyzed by the violence unfolding across the courtyard. The woman's movements grew sluggish. Her hands dropped away from the man's arms, falling limply onto the bed sheets. Her body settled back into the mattress, completely still. The man remained leaning over her for a long minute. Then, he stood up straight and turned his head slowly, rotating his narrow shoulders towards the window. Across a gulf of empty air and driving rain, the killer looked directly into my lenses with piercing yellow gaze. A cold dread slammed into my chest. The distance between us was vast, yet I felt the weight of that stare as if the killer were standing in my own living room. The man took a slow step backward, moving away from the bed. He positioned himself directly behind a thin, modern floor lamp standing near the window. The lamp consisted of a simple metal pole, perhaps 2 inches wide, attached to a flat base. The killer stepped behind the 2-inch pole and completely vanished. I blinked, pulling the binoculars away from my face, rubbing my eyes fiercely. I looked back through the lens. The bedroom was empty. The floor lamp stood in the corner, undisturbed. A man easily exceeding 7 feet in height had stepped behind a metal rod no wider than a broomstick and ceased to exist visually. Panic finally broke through my paralysis. The heavy binoculars slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a loud crack. I stumbled backward. My heart was screaming. I scrambled across the dark living room, snatching my cell phone off the kitchen counter. I dialed 911, my hand shaking so violently I nearly dropped the device. The dispatcher answered, asking for the location of the emergency. I gave the address of the opposite building, stuttering through the apartment number, frantically explaining that a woman had just been murdered. The dispatcher demanded my name and my location, asking how I witnessed the event. I refused to answer the latter, simply repeating the victim's apartment number before severing the connection. I threw the phone onto the counter and ran to my front door. I engaged the heavy brass deadbolt, slid the chain lock into place. I stood in the center of my locked apartment, gasping for air. The rain lashed aggressively against my own living room windows. I backed away from the glass, retreating into the shadowed hallway connecting the living space to my bedroom. The adrenaline surging through my veins began to curdle into a deep, primal unease. The ambient temperature in the apartment was dropping. A profound, icy chill began to seep out from the corners of the room. The air conditioning was entirely shut off, yet the sudden cold was biting enough to raise the hair on my arms. I scanned the dark living room. The layout was identical to how I had it. The sofa sat against the far wall. The television reflected the faint light from the street. The tall wooden coat rack stood near the barricaded door. I stared at the coat rack. Something about the room felt wrong. My equilibrium shifted, producing a faint, nauseating sense of vertigo. I rubbed my temples, trying to clear the sudden pressure building behind my eyes. I focused on the coat rack again. My depth perception felt completely skewed. The wooden pole of the rack looked unusually thick, blurring slightly at the edges, as if my vision was smudging the surrounding space to compensate for an anomaly. The space around the pole seemed to ripple, subtly distorting the wallpaper behind it. I took a slow, trembling breath. My mind raced, trying to force logic onto an impossible visual field. The killer across the courtyard had vanished behind a 2-inch lamp pole. The object in my own room was distorting in the exact same manner. A memory from a basic high school biology class surfaced through the rising tide of panic. The human eye has a structural flaw. Where the optic nerve passes through the retina to connect to the brain, there's absolutely no light-detecting photoreceptors. It creates a literal blind spot, a dead zone in the visual field of every human being. We never notice it. We walk through the world completely unaware of this gap because the brain is a master of digital manipulation. It constantly edits our visual field, taking colors and patterns from the surrounding area and seamlessly painting over the blank space. Furthermore, the two eyes work in tandem, overlapping their fields of vision to compensate for each other's blind spots. If an organism understood human anatomy well enough, and if it was impossibly razor thin, it would not need to hide behind a wall. It would only need to hide behind a narrow object, actively manipulating its posture to stay perfectly aligned within the optic disc. It would rely on the human brain's own rendering software to erase it from existence, smoothing over the gap with the background environment. The blind spot only successfully hides an object when both eyes are open, working together to stitch the image closed. I raised my left hand. My fingers were trembling uncontrollably. I pressed the palm of my hand tightly over my left eye, plunging half of my visual field into darkness. The brain's compensatory mechanism instantly failed. The overlapping vision collapsed. The distortion around the wooden coat rack snapped into horrifying, vivid clarity. Standing perfectly behind the narrow wooden pole, less than 10 feet away from me, was the man. He was a nightmare. His limbs were tucked incredibly close to his torso, compressing his physical width to an unnatural degree. The man was contorted in a rigid, vertical line, hiding entirely within the narrow sliver of block light cast by the coat rack. His head was tilted slightly downward, long, spindly fingers resting gently against the wood. He was staring directly at me, with terrifyingly snake eyes. A scream caught in the back of my throat, strangling me. I did not drop my hand from my eye. The moment I allowed my binocular vision to resume, the brain would edit the killer out again, allowing him to move unseen. The man realized his camouflage had been breached, twitched, a jerky spasm, attempting to adjust his angle to slip back into the periphery of my remaining visual field. He leaned slightly, his impossibly long joints popping loudly in the quiet apartment. I kept my eye covered, tracking his movement, locking my focus onto his horrifying form. He could not hide from a single, fixed point of view. I took a slow step backward toward the hallway closet. The man let out a low, vibrating hiss. He unspooled his limbs, the angles of his elbows and knees extending outward as he prepared to abandon stealth for violence. I reached behind me, throwing open the folding doors of the utility closet. My hand patted frantically against the cluttered shelves. I knocked over boxes of nails and spare light bulbs, desperately searching for the plastic bin holding my old hobby supplies. The man took a massive, sweeping step forward, clearing half the distance between us in a single stride. His elongated arms reached out to grasp me. My fingers brushed against the metal cylinder. I gripped the can of spray paint tightly, yanking it off the shelf, then simply pulled off the plastic cap with my teeth, aimed the nozzle directly at the towering man advancing towards me, and pressed down hard. A thick stream of bright neon orange pigment erupted from the can. The heavy aerosol spray coated the man from his collarbone down to his knees. The wet paint hit the stretched skin with a sickening splat. The killer recoiled violently, letting out an ear-piercing yell that shattered the silence of the apartment. He thrashed blindly, throwing his long arms over his face, completely disoriented by the sudden assault. The bright neon orange paint clung to his flesh, dripping down his ribcage. The man's form was now illuminated against the muted colors of my living room. I dropped my left hand from my eye. My binocular vision engaged, but the brain could no longer process the cover-up. The sheer contrast of the orange pigment destroyed the man's ability to blend into the background. I did not wait for him to recover. I threw the aerosol can at his chest and bolted. I teared my fingernails on the wood as I clawed at the deadbolt. I snapped the lock back, ripped the door open, and threw myself into the brightly lit hallway of the apartment complex. I sprinted towards the stairwell, just as the heavy, echoing sound of heavy boots hit the concrete steps below. 3 police officers burst onto my floor, their weapons drawn, responding to the emergency call. I collapsed against the hallway wall, pointing frantically toward the open door of my apartment, screaming that the killer was inside. The officers moved, sweeping into my living room, shouting commands into the empty space. I sat on the hallway floor, gasping for air, listening to them tear through my apartment. A few minutes later, the lead officer stepped out back into the hall. He lowered his weapon and looked at me with a hard, unreadable expression. He informed me that my apartment was completely empty. The windows were locked from inside. There was no sign of an intruder. The only disturbance was a smashed lamp, a knocked-over coat rack, and a massive puddle of bright orange spray paint soaking into the living room carpet. While they detained me in the hallway, another unit breached the apartment in the opposite building based on the address I'd given the dispatcher. They found the woman in her bedroom. She had been brutally strangled in her bed. The investigators spent hours tearing through her apartment. They found no signs of forced entry. The doors were deadbolted. The windows were sealed. There was no DNA, no fibers, no fingerprints, and no trace of a killer ever entering or exiting the room. The detective sat me down in a sterile interrogation room at the precinct later that morning. They laid out the facts. A woman was murdered in a locked room. Simultaneously, I called 911, barricade myself in my own locked apartment, and vandalize my own living room with spray paint. I possess intimate knowledge of the exact time and nature of the murder across the courtyard, yet I claim a towering, invisible man committed the crime. They did not believe a single word I said. The detectives leaned across the metal table, their voices low and dangerous, demanding to know how I orchestrated it. They asked how I bypassed her locks. They asked why I staged a fake break-in at my own residence to establish an alibi. They pressed me for hours, dissecting my voyeuristic habit, painting a narrative of a disturbed neighbor who escalated from watching to killing. They could not officially charge me with murder. There was no physical evidence linking me to the victim's apartment, and my own building security cameras proved I had not left my floor all night. They released me pending further investigation, but the suspicion is absolute. I'm currently staying in a cheap motel on the edge of the city. I cannot return to my apartment. Police are watching my every move, waiting for me to slip up, waiting for me to reveal how I pulled off the impossible crime. I know they will never find the killer. The authorities are searching for a human being who uses doors and leaves footprints. They're not searching for a man who folds himself into the blank spaces of human biology. I'm writing this post from my motel room, keeping the lights burning bright, staring at every narrow shadow cast by the cheap furniture. I need people to understand the mechanics of what's hunting in this city. The human brain is desperate to present a complete, seamless picture of the world. It will lie to you. It will paint over the anomalies to maintain the illusion of safety. If you're sitting in your home late at night, and the ambient temperature suddenly drops, if you feel a heavy, icy dread settling in your stomach, and the room suddenly feels deeply off, if your depth perception shifts, and a coat rack, a floor lamp, or even an open door frame looks unusually wide or slightly blurred at the edges, do not trust your vision. Do not assume the room is empty. Raise your hand, tightly close one eye. You might be completely paralyzed by the horror of what's standing in your blind spot, quietly waiting for you to go to sleep. The next story is from Solovag, titled, I found a hidden tunnel network beneath my rental house. Today, I heard the whispering inside my walls again. I was 19 years old when I decided to spend my summer vacation in Ohio. I rented a small, cheap basement apartment in an old house owned by an elderly couple in the suburbs of Toledo. The house was surrounded by a neglected yard, and the basement had a separate, completely isolated side entrance. During the first week, everything was pretty normal, and honestly, a bit boring. I spent most of my time reading and browsing the internet, but things started to change at the beginning of the second week, specifically during the afternoons. In this area, the afternoons are dead silent because everyone stays indoors due to the heavy humidity. I started noticing a strange sound coming from the corner of the room, right behind the heavy wooden wardrobe that was fixed against the wall. It was a faint, steady scratching sound, like something alive was moving very slowly behind the drywall. At first, I just thought it was mice, which is pretty common in old houses around there. But the sound was too heavy, and it never happened at night. It always started at exactly 1 p.m., lasted for a full hour, and then stopped out of nowhere. One day, wanting to get rid of the mice, I decided to push the heavy wardrobe aside to see what was behind it. When I finally moved it with great effort, a strange chill ran down my spine. The wooden wall behind the wardrobe had a small, neatly cut square covered by a piece of cardboard attached with old duct tape. I peeled off the cardboard very slowly. I expected to find a utility space filled with pipes or wires, but what was disgusting was the smell that immediately burst out. It was the scent of very old dust mixed with something that smelt like burnt sulfur. I pointed my phone's flashlight into the gap. There were no pipes. It was a narrow, dark tunnel extending horizontally beneath the foundation of the house. I carefully put my head inside the opening and shone the light to the very end of the passage. A few meters away, I saw something that made my breath completely catch. There was a small child's sneaker, blue and heavily faded, covered in a thick layer of dust. Right next to it was a long strand of blonde hair lying on the ground, and old postage stamps from the 1980s scattered all around it. And at that exact moment, the power cut out completely in the apartment. The room went pitch black, and I heard it clearly coming from the depths of the dark tunnel right in front of my face. It was the sound of a deep, wet breath being drawn in, followed by a warm child's voice whispering in pure terror, "Please, put the cover back before he wakes up." I scrambled backward violently, smashing my back against the wardrobe. I was hyperventilating in pure panic, surrounded by total darkness. I grabbed the piece of the cardboard and frantically taped it back with shaking hands, then pushed the heavy wardrobe with all my strength to block the opening again. I immediately went upstairs using the outdoor steps to speak with the owner of the house, Old Man Arthur. I knocked on the door loudly until he opened it. He was wearing his gardening overalls and looked tired. When I told him that I heard strange noises and found a hidden opening, the look on his face changed completely. The kind expression vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, dead stare. He said in a sharp, dry tone, "That opening is just for maintaining the old heating pipes. Do not mess with it again, or I will have to terminate your lease immediately." He didn't give me a chance to argue and slammed the door right in my face. I went back down to my apartment, completely shaken up. I couldn't sleep at all that night. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint vibration in the apartment. The refrigerator in the small kitchen was making a strange noise, like it was shifting from its spot. I got up and turned on the living room light with trembling hands. When I stepped into the kitchen, I froze. The fridge wasn't moving on its own. There was a small gap in the hardwood floor right beneath it. And there were human fingers, incredibly pale, long and thin with no fingernails, reaching up through the crack, slowly trying to pull the fridge's power cord downward to unplug it. I let out a terrified scream. In a split second, the fingers retreated back into the crack with a strange speed, and a heavy silence followed. I approached very slowly and looked through the small gap using my phone's flashlight. I didn't see a face. Instead, I saw a massive pile of papers and old photographs scattered down there. There were pictures of missing children, including a little boy wearing blue sneakers. Suddenly, a very wide eye appeared in the crack, staring right up at me from below. It blinked slowly. Then, I heard a sharp scratching sound of the fingernails against the wooden floorboards right beneath my feet, moving straight towards my bedroom. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw my essential belongings into a small backpack and decided to leave the place immediately. When I stepped out of the side door into the yard, it was almost 4 a.m., and a thick fog was suffocating the Toledo suburbs. I walked fast toward the nearby bus stop, about a quarter of a mile away. The streets were completely empty of cars. I got on the very first bus that arrived, went straight to the airport, and booked the first flight back to my hometown. A few days after I got back, I couldn't even get what happened out of my head. My conscience was eating me alive because of those pictures of the children. I decided to call the Lucas County Sheriff's Office in Ohio and filed a detailed report about what I saw in that basement apartment and the photos under the floorboards. The police took the report seriously and sent a unit to search the house. 2 days later, the detective in charge called me back. His voice was filled with absolute shock. He said, "We raided the house, son. Old Man Arthur and his wife were found dead in their bed. They'd been dead for at least 2 weeks from gas poisoning, which means they were rotting corpses the entire time you were staying there." My mind went completely blank. I asked him, in a panicked voice, "Then who was the man I talked to?" The detective let out a heavy sigh and said in a terrified tone, "When we moved the wardrobe, we didn't just find pipes. We found a massive network of narrow, dark, wood-lined tunnels extending under the entire neighborhood. We found belongings of missing children dating back to the 80s, and secret passages leading inside the walls. We uncovered extremely tight spaces in the tunnels right under the floorboards of the neighbors' bedrooms, perfectly designed for someone to lay flat on their back and listen to everything happening above them. 10 years have passed since that night. The tunnels were completely filled with concrete, and they never caught the person or the thing that was living down there. I tried to forget everything and live a normal life in my new high-rise apartment in Boston. About a week ago, the humidity in my bedroom started rising for no reason, and dark spots began appearing on the plaster ceiling. Yesterday, at exactly 1 p.m., while I was reading in the quiet living room, I heard it clearly. A faint, steady dragging sound, like something heavy was sliding very slowly inside my bedroom wall, followed by a tiny whisper coming from right behind the power outlet next to my bed. It was the sound of a wet, hissing breath saying, "We miss you." My little brother came back from vacation different. Last night, I found out he never came back at all. By Zohair. I need to get this out before I lose my mind, or before whatever's wearing my skin decides I've said too much. I'm writing this from the closet in my bedroom. It's 4:12 a.m. The house is doing that thing again. Breathing. Not the normal expansion and contraction of old pipes. I mean, breathing. A slow, wet inhale somewhere behind the walls, followed by a sigh that ruffles the dusts on the floorboards. I can hear Liam's door creaking open down the hall. Soft footsteps. They'll stop outside my room in about 30 seconds. They always do. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because if I don't organize this, I'll convince myself I imagined all of it. I didn't. The bruise on my wrist proves I didn't. 1 week ago, my family got back from our annual summer trip. Every August, we rent the same cabin on the Oregon coast. It's nothing fancy. Knotty pine walls, a kitchen that smells like coffee and old spices, a wraparound porch facing the craggy shoreline. We've been going since I was 12. Liam's 11 now, and this year he spent the whole trip doing what 11-year-olds do, complaining about the Wi-Fi, collecting obscene amounts of shells, and following me around like a shadow. I'm 26. I moved back home after college to save money, which is its own kind of horror. But up until last week, it was fine. Boring even. The last day of the trip, we went to a beach we don't usually visit. A cove about 2 miles south of the cabin, accessible only at low tide through a gap in the cliffs. Mom found it in some coastal guidebook. Mermaid's Grotto, it was called. Touristy name, but the place itself was strange. The sand was darker than it should have been, almost black, and the tide pools were filled with water that seemed too still, too clear, reflecting a sky that looked 2 shades too green. Liam wandered off. I was on the rocks taking pictures. Mom was reading. Dad was napping on a towel. It was maybe 15 minutes before I realized I couldn't hear him. The constant hum of a boy narrating his own adventure to no one. I found him at the far end of the cove, standing at the mouth of a sea cave with his back to me. He was perfectly still, which was wrong. Liam doesn't do still. He's a kid made of springs and noise. Liam? He didn't turn. The cave behind him was dark, and the air coming out of it smelled wrong. Not like seaweed and salt, but sweeter. Staler. Like water that had been sitting in a closed room for years. Liam, come on. Tide's coming back. He turned, then I remember thinking his eyes looked odd. Not the color, just the way they focused. Like he was looking at me from the bottom of a well. I was just exploring, he said, and smiled. A normal smile. Liam's smile. I didn't think about it again until the drive home. We pulled into the driveway at 9:47 p.m. 7 hours of traffic, 2 rest stops, 1 screaming match about who forgot the cooler in the cabin, me. We were exhausted. Dad unlocked the front door, and we all stumbled inside, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. Our house shouldn't have a smell. We'd been gone a week. It should have been neutral, maybe faintly musty. Instead, the hallway hit me with this thick, damp sweetness, like salt water left to rot in the sun underneath something floral I couldn't place. The kind of smell that coats the inside of your nose and stays. Did something die in the fridge? I asked. Mom just wrinkled her nose. I'll check. Someone grabbed the suitcases. I turned to go back to the car and stopped. The suitcases were already in the living room. All 4 of them, lined up neatly by the couch. Ours are the hard shell kind, and they're heavy. Mine alone is 40 pounds when full. I stared at them, that wrongness settling into my chest like a cold stone. Who brought these in? Dad was already heading upstairs, not me. Mom called from the kitchen. I thought you did. I looked at Liam. He was standing by the suitcases, one hand resting on top of mine like he'd been waiting for me to notice. They were heavy, he said. Matter-of-factly, I helped. A 10-year-old who weighs 70 pounds soaking wet did not carry 4 packed suitcases up a flight of porch steps. I opened my mouth to say so, but he was already walking toward his room, his bare feet paddling softly on the hardwood. I stood there for a long time, looking at the suitcases. They were damp. Condensation clung to the shelves like they'd been out in the fog. We hadn't had fog. The first night, I didn't sleep. Jet lag, I told myself. The drive, the weird smell. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. At 2:47 a.m., I heard footsteps. Light, bare ones, pacing the hallway. I assumed it was Liam going to the bathroom. Kids wake up, it's normal. But the pacing didn't stop. Back and forth, back and forth. A slow, deliberate rhythm that went on for 45 minutes. At 3 a.m. exactly, the footsteps stopped outside my door. I held my breath. The door was cracked open an inch. My room gets stuffy, and through the gap, I could see a sliver of the hallway. A sliver of Liam. He was standing perfectly rigid facing my door, not looking through the gap, just facing it, the way a camera faces a subject. His arms hung at his sides, straight as rods. He didn't move. He didn't blink. I lay there, heart hammering so hard I could taste copper, watching my little brother stand like a mannequin in the hallway for 11 minutes. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his room. In the morning, he was eating Cinnamon Toast Crunch and watching Transformers. He burped at me and laughed. Normal. Completely normal. Liam, were you up last night? Mom says sleepwalking runs in the family, he said, not looking up from the TV. We don't remember it. We. The word snagged on something in my brain, but I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. Day 2. I went into Liam's room to return a book I borrowed and stopped in the doorway. Something was different, and it took me a second to place it. The mirror. The full-length mirror on the back of his door. The one Mom put there so he could check if his school fit every morning. It was covered with a towel. A ratty blue beach towel. The one he'd taken on the trip. Liam, why is your mirror covered? He was sitting on the bed, legs crossed, sorting his shell collection. I don't like it anymore. Since when? Since it shows the wrong things. My throat tightened. What do you mean, wrong? He held up a sand dollar, examining it in the light. Like when you look in a mirror and your face is yours, but it's not yours. It's the wrong one. He said this with the same casual tone he'd used to describe a video game level he couldn't beat. Then he looked at me, and for a split second, his expression flickered. Something old and hungry passing behind his eyes like a cloud across the sun. We don't like that lamp either. I looked at the lamp, the desk lamp by his bed. It was the same lamp he'd had for years, a blue ceramic one with a rocket ship. What's wrong with the lamp? We just don't like it. He turned back to his shells. Conversation over. I backed out of the room and went straight to the hallway. The family photos. I don't know why I checked them. Some instinct. Some part of my brain that had been quietly cataloging wrongness and was now connecting dots. Every photo of Liam on the wall was blurred. Not the whole picture, just his face. Like he'd moved during a long exposure. A smudge of features where his grin should be. But the photos had been fine when we left. I dusted this hallway the day before we drove to the coast. I leaned in to look closer. The glass on the frames was slightly fogged with age, and in the reflection, only in the reflection, I could see Liam's face. Not blurred, perfectly clear. And he was smiling. Not his gap-toothed braces glinting smile. The smile was wide and lipless, the grin of something that had learned what a smile is by being told about it. Too many teeth. No teeth. Both at the same time. I jerked back, looked at the photo directly, blurred again. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Day 3, the footprints. I got up for water at midnight and found them on the hardwood floor of the living room. Small, bare footprints, child-sized. They started at the front door and tracked across the rug, through the dining room, and down the hallway towards Liam's bedroom. Wet. I knelt down and touched the edge of one. Cold, damp, and the smell. God, the smell. That same sweet, stagnant rot. Like the water in a tide pool where something's been decomposing for weeks. Like the ocean back in that cove. I followed them. They led all the way to Liam's room, and that's when my stomach dropped. The footsteps stopped 3 feet from his bed. Just stopped. The last one was perfectly intact, as if whoever made them simply ceased to exist, or as if they'd been lifted from that spot and placed somewhere else. Somewhere without footprints. I checked Liam. He was asleep, or his eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Normal. Except his hands were folded neatly on his chest, the way you'd position a body in a casket, and his room was freezing. My breath didn't fog, but it should have. I didn't sleep again that night. Day 4. Mom and Dad stopped humoring me. I showed Mom the photos. She looked at them, tilted her head, and said, "Honey, they look fine to me." I showed her the footprints. By then they dried to faint salt rings, and she said the dog from next door probably got in. We don't have a dog door. The neighbors don't have a dog. "Maybe you should talk to someone," she said, not unkindly. "You seem really on edge. It could be stress, post-vacation blues." "Mom, there is something wrong with Liam." Her face hardened. "Liam is fine. He's adjusting to being back. Kids need routine, and we disrupted his. You're projecting." "Did you see him last night?" "He was standing in the hallway at 3 a.m. like a..." "I'm scheduling you an appointment with Dr. Reeves." Her voice was steel wrapped in mom concern. "I won't have you obsessing over your brother. It's not healthy." She walked away. I stood in the kitchen shaking, and that's when I saw it. She was at the end of the hall, standing in front of Liam's closed door. And her face, God, her face. She was staring at the door with an expression I've never seen on another human being. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted, her skin the color of old paper. She looked terrified. Not concerned, not confused, primal, prey animal terror, the kind of fear that paralyzes. She stood there for 10 seconds, then her face went blank, smooth as a mask, and she turned and walked to her bedroom like nothing had happened. She saw something. She knows. And whatever it is, it won't let her say it. Day 5. My phone. I was scrolling through the photos, the ones from the trip, trying to find a picture of that cove, that cave, something to anchor me to reality, when I found the folder. It was at the bottom of my gallery, timestamp starting the night we got back. 37 photos I didn't take. They were all from inside Liam's closet. The slated doors, the view through the narrow gaps between the wood. They all showed his room at night, his bed, his small form under the blankets, sleeping. Photo after photo after photo, all taken between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., all from the same angle. Phone had been on my nightstand, charging. I'm a light sleeper. I would have heard someone take it. I swiped to the last photo, and my skin tried to crawl off my body. It was the same angle, the closet, looking out at Liam's bed, but in the foreground, resting on the edge of the closet door's interior frame, was a hand. Small, pale. The fingers were too long, the joints sitting wrong, bending slightly in directions fingers shouldn't bend. The skin had a translucent quality, like something that lives where light doesn't reach. It wasn't Liam's hand. It wasn't anyone's hand. It was the hand of whatever was holding my phone. I deleted the photos. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the phone twice. When I checked my gallery an hour later, they were back, every single one. That night, last night, at 2:14 a.m., I woke up unable to breathe. Something was sitting on my chest, heavy, so heavy. I opened my eyes, and Liam was straddling me, his knees pinning my arms. He was looking down on me, and his eyes were open, but empty, like glass marbles pushed into dough. No recognition, no Liam behind them. He leaned down until his face was an inch from mine. His breath smelled like brine and something older, something that made my hindbrain scream. "Remember when you almost drowned when you were 8, he whispered. And the voice was his, but also not his, layered, doubled, like two people speaking in imperfect unison. The water was so cold, it filled your lungs. We remember. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. All I could do was stare up at my little brother and feel the cold spreading through my chest like it was back in that pool, going under, the chlorine burning my throat. He blinked. Life flooded back into his eyes. He looked confused, then embarrassed. Sorry, bad dream. He climbed off me and shuffled back into his room, and I lay there gasping, tears running into my ears. I'd almost drowned at the YMCA pool when I was 8. I never told anyone. It was my secret, my shameful near-death that I buried so deep I barely admitted it to myself. Liam was a baby when it happened. He couldn't know, but it could. Tonight, the whispers. I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing, the gaslighting, the slow rot of my own certainty. At 1:30 a.m., I crept to Liam's door and pressed my ear against the wood. He was whispering. That much I expected, but what I heard nearly broke me. It was Liam's voice, yes, and underneath it, layered like a harmony in a song no one should sing, was my voice. My own voice reciting my fears in a sing-song tone. I'm afraid of the dark because I think something watches me sleep. I'm afraid I'll die alone and no one will notice. I'm afraid of the ocean because I can't see what's below. Every private, wretched terror I'd ever spoken aloud poured out in my own voice through my little brother's lips. I threw the door open. Liam sat cross-legged on the bed, hands on his lap. The room was empty, just him, the covered mirror, and the faint smell of low tide. He blinked at me, sleepy and sweet. Just talking to my friend, he said, yawning. He says you're a good sister. He wants to meet you soon. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. I backed into the hall and ran to the attic and grabbed the old nanny cam Mom never returned, the one from when Liam was a toddler. It's small, wireless, connects to my phone. I set it on the top shelf of his closet behind a stack of board games, aiming it at the bed. I told myself I'd watch the feed. I told myself I'd get proof. I told myself then someone would have to believe me. I watched the footage live for an hour. Nothing. Liam sleeping. The closet door cracked open. Normal. I dozed off with my phone in my hand. At 3:33 a.m., a notification woke me. Motion detected. I opened the feed. Liam's body was rising from the bed, not sitting up, not a kid getting up, rising, like something was lifting him by the sternum. His arms dangled, his head lolled back, and his body folded upwards in a way that made me gag because spines don't bend like that. Joints shouldn't hinge in those directions. He hung in the air for a moment, suspended like a marionette whose puppeteer was testing the strings. Then his shadow peeled off the wall. I'm not being poetic. It peeled. It detached from the shadow his body cast and crawled, vertebra by vertebra, like a spider made of darkness, up the wall and across the ceiling. It moved wrong. Too many joints, limbs that bent where there shouldn't be knees. It stopped at the corner of the room, and I swear to God, it looked at the camera. The closet door swung open, not violently, slowly, like it was being pushed by breath. Behind it was black, not the black of an unlit closet, black. A void that had texture, depth. It pulsed. It breathed. That wet inhale I'd been hearing in the walls, and the darkness expanded and contracted like lungs. And then Liam's head turned toward the camera. He was still floating. His head turned, rotated, on his neck. Not the way a head is supposed to turn. He kept turning past the point where a neck should snap, kept rotating until he was facing the camera directly. And he was smiling that smile. The wide one. The one with too many teeth and no teeth. And the voice, the double voice, his and not his, spoke directly into the camera, directly to me. We see you watching. Come play. You promised we could all be together. The head kept turning, full rotation, past 360 degrees, and still that smile. The feed cut to static. I threw the phone. I heard it crack against the wall. I didn't care. I was on the floor of my room, hyperventilating, my whole body shaking so hard I bit through my lip. The nanny cam is in pieces on my floor now. But before I smashed it, I checked the footage one last time. The recording was corrupted. Static, noise, broken frames. Except for one frame. One single, crystal clear frame. My own face. Eyes wide. Mouth open in a silent scream. But I'm not in the closet. I'm not in Liam's room. I'm somewhere dark and wet, and the thing behind me in the frame has its arms around my shoulders, and it's smiling. I don't remember that. I don't remember that happening, but I found the note. After I smashed the camera, I went to my desk to find something, anything to ground me. In my top drawer, under my journal, in handwriting that is unmistakably mine, was a note. You said yes at the beach. You said you'd trade places to save him. The trade is almost done. I don't remember writing it. I don't remember saying yes, but I remember the cove. I remember finding Liam at the mouth of that cave, and I remember God. I remember feeling something brush my ankle in the water. I remember a voice, low and wet and ancient, saying, "The short one is open, but the tall one is stronger. Choose." And I remember thinking, so clearly, so desperately, not him, anything but him. Take me instead if you have to take someone. I said yes. I said yes, and I forgot. And whatever came back from that beach has been wearing me during the hours I can't account for, filling my phone with photos, writing notes in my handwriting, living in my body, while the real me, well, the part of me that's writing this, has been blind to it. That's why the footprints stopped. They weren't walking to Liam. They were walking back from wherever I've been going. It's almost 5 a.m. now. I can hear Liam's door opening, the soft footsteps in the hall. But this time, I'm not going to watch through a camera or listen through a door. I'm going to confront it. I have to. If I made a deal, I'll make it. If there's a way to save Liam, really save him, pull him back from whatever's been wearing him like a coat, then it is in that room, in that mirror he covered. I can hear my own voice coming from down the hall, singing, that sing-song tone, reciting my fears, laughing between verses. I'm going to post this now. If I don't update, you'll know why. And if you're reading this and you live near the coast, any coast, don't go to the coves at low tide. Don't look into the caves. And if something asks you to choose, don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't. He's at my door. Update. I'm adding this part after. I don't know how long I've been sitting here. It might be minutes. It might be hours. But I need to finish this before I can't anymore. I went into Liam's room. The towel had fallen from the mirror. It was on the floor, crumpled like it'd been pulled down. The mirror was uncovered, and the room was bathed in that pre-dawn gray that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. Liam was standing in front of the mirror. Not the real Liam. The reflection. The real Liam was... I think the real Liam was... The reflection was wearing his body like an outfit, smiling that smile. And when I stepped up beside it, I looked at my own reflection. And my reflection was smiling too. Not my smile. That wide, lipless, toothless grin. My reflection's eyes were wrong. Too knowing. Too old. And behind my reflection, behind me in the glass, stood a shape. Tall. Too tall. Limbs folding and unfolding with too many joints. A silhouette that seemed to be made of the darkness between stars. And it was pressing my face against the back of my reflection's head like a lover. It spoke with my voice. You were the strong one, so we chose you. Liam is just the door. You're the house. And then I heard the real voice, Liam's voice, small, terrified, coming from inside the mirror, muffled, like he was trapped behind glass in a room that was filling with water. Help me, please. It's so dark in here. Why did you leave me? Why did you leave me? I could see him in the glass, behind the reflection, behind the thing wearing my face, my little brother, pounding on the inside of the mirror, his fists leaving ripples on the surface like the glass was water. His face was streaked with tears and something darker. Seawater, brine, black as the void in his closet. He was drowning in there. He's been drowning since the beach, and I didn't even know. I pressed my hand to the mirror. The surface rippled, not like glass, like water, cold water. It closed around my fingers, my palm, my wrist, and from the other side, my reflection's hand, the thing's hand, reached through and gripped me with a strength that crushed bone. It pulled. I pulled back. The glass rippled and stretched, and I felt cold, salt water close over my head, filling my nose, my throat, my lungs. And the last thing I heard before everything went dark was Liam screaming my name and that double-voiced laugh. I woke up on the floor of Liam's room. Mom found me this morning, asleep on the rug next to his bed, and said I looked peaceful. She smoothed my hair and asked if I had a nightmare. Liam was sitting at the kitchen table eating pancakes, and he smiled at me, his real smile, the one with the gap in his teeth, and said, "Good morning." Everything is normal. The photos are fine. The mirror is covered again. My phone gallery is empty. The footprints are gone. But I'm writing this because something is wrong with my hands. When I type, my fingers bend just a little too far. And when I look in the mirror, any mirror, my reflection blinks half a second after I do. And last night, while I was brushing my teeth, I heard my own voice come out of my mouth without me speaking. The house is warm. We like it here. Mom says I look peaceful. She doesn't know I'm still screaming inside. I'll update if anything changes, but I have a feeling it won't. I think this is just how it is now. We like it here.